So I'm Raquel Woods, Jeff Schahczenski, Nina Prater, Aisha Tillman, my co-workers that'll be assisting. And this workshop is a risk management workshop on diversified fruit and nursery farm, which is, we shot the film at one of our co-workers, Guy Ames' farm, who runs this nursery. And he's going to talk a little more, but we shot it's maybe like a 3-minute film. So you can see some of the diversifications that he have on his farm, and see some of the risks that are assessed with his farm, and see some of the things that happen on the farm, and get some recommended advice from him. Then he's also going to do some speaking afterwards about this workshop and some of the risks that we try to get a lot of the farmers, existing farmers, as well as beginner farmers, to understand. And then we're gonna have my my coworker Jeff is going to come in and talk about a lot of the insurances that are provided with whole farm revenue insurances. And Jeff is our guru of insurance. People, whenever we'd have these type workshops, Jeff is going to always speak on this, because he have a plethora of knowledge that he'd like to share and get the advice out to people. So if anybody have any questions about this, please feel free to ask, whether it be in the chat or in the questions. I don't know if Jeff, you want to have questions held to the end, or would you like to answer questions as we go along?
Oh, I might break at some point and ask some questions, and then at the end for sure.
Okay, definitely. Yeah.
And Guy too can respond.
Yeah, Guy can respond also. So without further ado, we're gonna start this workshop out with the short film that we filmed on Guy's farm. Here.
I'm Guy Ames, and this is Ames Orchard and Nursery. Of course, the Ames part's my given name, my family name rather. The orchard and the nursery indicates that we've got really two different parts of this farm, an orchard and the nursery, and they're quite a bit different from one another, but connected. Well, it's 24 acres in all, but a whole lot of it's not being used, it's woods or pasture. The risks here are usually related to weather. So it's a fruit farm, and there's always a risk of late frost and taking the fruit. If the late frosts come around when the trees are in bloom, you can lose a crop. The fruit part's very risky. So in order to deal with that risk, we plant a lot of different kinds of fruit. We're certified naturally grown, same rules as organic. So we use the chicken litter as fertilizer. So that's important too. But the main risks, of course, are predators. Now, most of the fruit we have here is hardy, is cold hardy, but that February freeze really hit us hard, as it did a lot of people. We kind of pushed the envelope, so we grow muscadines, which were a little far north from muscadines, and it killed almost all of our muscadines to the ground. We lost a few Asian persimmons. We knew we were taking a risk to grow those Asian persimmons, and one of the ways that we dealt with that risk was planting more Asian American crosses, some pure American persimmons, but it's kind of risky. We're always pushing that envelope in order to find a new market, but finding a new market can be risky. We don't have any insurance for the farm, for the crops. Yeah, we've got liability, people might come out here, like in case you step in a hole. But no crop insurance. And of course, it hasn't been until fairly recently that a diversified farmer like ours could get crop insurance, but now you can, because of USDA supported crop insurance. Whole farm revenue crop insurance is a way for these diversified farms to go and help with that risk of crop loss. We've got apples, pears, persimmons, pawpaws are a big thing for us now. Zombie fruit trees, that's our own name, I can tell you, but you wouldn't know what it was anyway. We also grow grapes, and then of course we grow the trees themselves to sell the trees. And that's actually the biggest money maker for us. A new person getting into the orchard business, I would tell them to diversify. So, if you try to just do apples, the risk is too much with one crop. You need to grow pears too, or maybe even something that blooms way later, like persimmons. So the main way that new grower should deal with that risk is planting a lot of different types of crops. It's a little bit harder, have to manage those. But if you have one frost that comes in and kills all the blossoms, and you don't have anything, and that risk is, you've taken it and you lost. I love trees, I love fruit, but it's risky business.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and we're gonna get Guy here to do a little talking about it. Guy, did you get a chance to?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I don't know why I can't see the screen now. I did for a minute, but oh my gosh.
We can see you too.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Now there you are.
All right.
All right. How can I help?
All right. So we just finished watching the film, and
I got down to the very last of that.
okay, yeah. So we were sharing some of the when we filmed your farm, we shared some of the things that you were talking about in risk,
Right.
on the farm. So we wanted you to talk about some of the things we're going to talk about: legal risk, human risk, financial risk, production risk, or marketing risk that you may have encountered on the farm and that you wanted to answer or add to the film, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing.
Yeah. Well, the biggest picture is maybe a little sad, but it's a common one, and that's that I really can't pay all the bills, especially the large mortgage, with farm proceeds. So the probably the most important way that I spread out risk is not quitting my day job.
Okay.
And that's, as you know, that's really common for most farmers, from what I understand. Most of us, somebody in the family has to work off farm in order to make ends meet, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But for me, it's being close to my markets, which is Fayetteville. That's a good thing. But the land values near Fayetteville are elevated because Fayetteville's a cool and groovy place, has good schools and all that. So the land values are such that it's hard to make with farm proceeds enough to pay the mortgage. So that's one of the most serious ones. And then, as I said in the video, the next most things I think are just diversifying crops. If I were just trying to grow fruit and market fruit, it's a perishable item. So there's the risk. It's a very risky item because of the late frost that we already talked about in that little video. So that's very serious. So what I've done, and again, we talked about it in the video, but it bears repeating, is grow something completely different, and that's the nursery crops. And it's related because they're apple trees and they're pear trees, grapevines, but I don't have to worry about bloom time with those things. I'm selling the plants themselves. And in a sense, I'm spreading out that risk to my buyers. If they want to eat apples, well, they can go to the grocery store, or they can help me spread out my risk and buy an apple tree and grow their own.
Okay.
Yeah. And another thing that I like about that is one of our risks, of course, as a fruit grower, any crop, insect and diseases. And when you have something that's so soft and delectable, like most of these fruits, there's a lot of things that want to eat them. So I've spread out that risk by, I'm going to teach you how to grow this stuff, customer of mine that's going to buy an apple tree. I'm going to teach you how to grow your own. And that actually reduces the pesticide use overall too, because most homeowners aren't going to spray with pesticides. So I've accomplished another goal and reduced my risk. I don't have to worry so much about producing fruit for these people. I'm going to teach them how to grow a fruit tree. What's the parable of the fish and the loaves teach a man to fish?
Yeah.
I could sell them the fish or the fruit in this case, or I could teach them how to grow their own. So that's actually, in a weird way, that's distributing the risk too out to my customers. You know, they're going to have those apple trees, and at least theoretically, I won't have to grow apples for those people that have bought my apple trees.
Right.
Have I said enough to prompt another question from you?
Uh,
I've run out right now for a second.
okay.
I'll have another drink of coffee, see what happens.
All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna allow Jeff to come in and allow Jeff to address the insurance issues according to vegetable growers, and Jeff is going to talk about that to see if whether you can get insurance, and he's going to talk about what type of insurance for Arkansas, because we know that farmers grow fruits. Farmers need insurance, and then fruit growers, you all are going to need insurance if you want your farm to thrive. So we're going to let Jeff come in and talk about the insurance, the risk management, the whole farm revenue portion of it. Unless someone has some questions for Guy, if you watch the video. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Jeff, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, guys. You just proved to me that crop insurance isn't the only thing you need to diversify risk. And that's one of a very, very, very important message that everyone should take. Hi, good morning. My name's Jeff Schahczenski. I've been working in the field of crop insurance for, I think, 18 years now. And I wish I hadn't sometimes. But anyway, let's get going. The first point, which Guy made very clear, is crop insurance is only one way to mitigate risk. It's not the only way. And Guy gave a lot of good examples of alternative ways, since he doesn't have crop insurance. And as we'll learn later, most farmers in the United States don't have crop insurance. So he's not even unusual.
I'm unusual.
That's true. That is true. But not necessarily because you don't have crop insurance.
Right.
Okay. So again, there are a lot of different ways and to do this. I'm going to use some jargon, and like any other field, there's always jargon, and these are fairly easy to understand. I think one thing that people don't see and hear very much is the idea of revenue risk. If you think about it, I'm an agriculture economist, and revenue is really just price times quantity, right? That's your revenue. And what that means is that you can have a risk because you might plant something, or at the beginning of the season, the price of the apple is X. And by the end of the season, when your apples are ready to sell, the price might have declined. There's a risk that's called market risk or price risk. And if you combine that with what most people think of as crop insurance is yield risk, meaning the freeze, as Guy was telling you, that can destroy your production. That's what most people think of in terms of crop insurance. They tend to think of what's often referred to in the insurance jargon as multiple peril crop insurance, meaning the multiple perils of weather and things that can affect you, including volcanic activity if you're in Hawaii. So the thing is that there's both a yield risk that can affect your revenue, and that's quantity and that's yield, and then there's price. So revenue risk is just to think of it as a combined idea that includes both of those. And much of crop insurance now that is sold, even though there are many yield policies left, as we will see, has moved towards the idea of revenue, of protecting both against price and quantity. The Risk Management Agency is the USDA agency that manages the federal crop insurance program. There are private crop insurance policies. They're very specialized, and I'm not going to talk about those. I'm only going to talk about the federal program today, and that's the one that's kind of governed by the USDA agency, Risk Management Agency, and also by the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, which is kind of the governing body. In the United States, for the federal program, there are what's called approved insurance providers, and there are 13. So for all the crop insurance under the federal program, which is extensive, there are really only 13 companies that are selling those in a relationship with the United States government. Liability is the value of what is insured. It's never 100%. with supplemental policies, you can get up to almost 95% coverage, but there's usually a deductible. Like in all insurance, there's a deductible. So you can't get it fully insured. Indemnity is the value or the payout when you make a claim, and premium is the cost. And in crop insurance, that is highly subsidized, as we will see. So the premium is really what the farmer pays, and then what you and I as taxpayers help pay for in terms of the subsidization of that, which is significant in crop insurance. And here's a basic idea of how the program, it's a weird system. It's a, sometimes I joke and say it's got the worst of both things. It's both the private sector and the public sector combined, which may be a dangerous thing, but that's the way it was set up. It was set up by Jimmy Carter that way in 1980, actually under the Carter administration. We shifted to an idea that private companies would essentially service the products, and the government, the USDA, would both help with the subsidization and the governance of that system. So there was more or less in the public interest. But as you can see, the producers pay a premium in which the part of that premium goes to the private insurance company, part of that goes back to the government, and then the subsidization, of course, comes from taxpayer dollars. And the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation kind of is this governing body that oversees it. This just gives you a sense that, you know, it's a public-private thing, but depending on the year, depending on how much is paid out, like all the total losses in the United States and all the income that comes in the United States can be different. And this chart gives you a sense from 2010 to 2019 of how this happened. Now, you can see in 2012, where my little pointer is, it was negative. This was, I don't know if you guys remember, they've been around, but 2012 was one of the most nationwide drought losses, risk losses in the country. It was well, you can see hardly, actually 2010 wasn't so great either, but 2012 was really a bad year. In fact, it was so bad that some of these AIPs had trouble because they didn't predict such a thing could happen across the country at one time, and so they ended up paying out a lot of net payments to farmers, and in the crop insurance companies didn't make as much. But you can see in the latter few years, particularly from about 2016 on, you're seeing that basically what happens is the AIPs, the companies, share. When there's a year where there's less payout than coming in, they gain. It's called underwriting gains, and they gain. So they've been making a good living. And I kind of just want to make this point because when you go to an agent, and which is usually represented by a crop insurance one of these 13 companies, you know, they're getting paid for their work, so they need to service you. Just, you know, they should be after and out for your interests as a farmer. And one thing that, and it's kind of a controversy, but specialty crops, and that's defined as I state there. I always think it's funny, or aesthetic gratification, and I'm assuming that's flowers, but I wasn't sure. It could be lavender, I suppose. That there's some aesthetic and you can insure lavender, but specialty crops are the crops, and many of those are in Arkansas, and many of them, like the pawpaw that Guy sends, are fairly specialized, and they are not often covered by insurance as a specific crop. And in 2000, there was about that many specialty crops with acres and production, and as you can see, roughly only about 3.2% of the value of specialty crops are actually covered by insurance. Now, that's very different when you talk about commodity crops, but for specialty crops, in a way, you know, there's not the availability that one might think there is. Here's Arkansas's usage in 2021, kind of, and I sorted it by the highest. And liability, again, is the value of what was insured. So the number one valuable crop in terms of insurance that was insured was soybeans, getting close to $1 billion worth of soybeans. And right after it was rice, and right after then it's corn, and then you got cotton, and you got wheat. What's the trend here, right? Those are large commodity storable crops. They have really, really good and insurance and available insurance. And they have both revenue and yield, although the preponderance of these are revenue. Revenue, again, because you get the two sides of the risk. You get the price and you get the yield coverage. This pasture rangeland forage is an interesting one, which I won't discuss today, but it's based on a weather index. And this has been more and more used by livestock producers. It actually insures the forage based on weather data and data. And it's a very bizarre kind of thing, but it's a very strange but up and coming kind of insurance because it's for the livestock grower. And then we got grain. And you see whole farm revenue is up there in Arkansas because it covers about $14 million worth of value. Now, the reason that's so high, and it's a revenue insurance only, it's so high is because when you insure under whole farm, you're insuring the whole farm. So that actually has a higher value than any specific one crop that a farm would produce. But you can see, since we're going to be focusing on nursery and fruit crops, nursery is up there, but if you look at the percentage wise, it's not very much of it's less than 1% of the value of what's been insured. You actually have a bees, which is also related to this index insurance, and grapes, which is interestingly, in 2021 there was only one policy sold for grapes and I believe it was in Washington County, the same county that guy is in Washington County, Arkansas, but only one policy sold. So you see the specialty crops aren't particularly covered in terms of usage in the state except for whole farm revenue, which does include specialty crops, one of its advantages. So let's see what, this is a really cool tool that I'm introducing today, and hopefully it's going to work. You gotta bear with me because I gotta share, stop share, share screen, and I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna share. Now you guys all see it? Somebody tell me yes before I go forward.
Yes.
Yay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Ag risk viewer. That's what you're talking about.
Viewer. I got it up. Okay, this is a new tool that not many people are familiar with, and it's recently been updated. And I'll load it really quickly here. This was done by the Southwest Climate Hub, which is a kind of there's 10 regional ones in the United States, and this is a way to look at crop insurance over the long run. And the reason they want to look on the long run is because the issues of climate disruption and extreme weather events and how that may be affecting the future of agriculture by looking a little bit at the past. So what this does, if you look at this, it gives us all the information about crop insurance from 1989 now up to 2020. They just updated it, and it gives it down to the county level. I can look at different like this metric is currently set in indemnities, and I can go down to the county level. But let's just look broadly at the state. It's a little easier to view that way. And you can see that what this is showing me is that for all crop insurance, the indemnity, which was the payout for over those entire years, I can see by state which state got the most payout in crop insurance. So in one way to think of this, although it's highly skewed towards the commodity crops, as we saw, it gives you a sense of the crops all insured in the United States, how much payout. And it gives you a sense of where the riskier places are. Because if you look at Texas and North Dakota, they had a huge amount of payouts over these years. And you can see where Arkansas is. And I can specifically click on Arkansas, and it tells me that over that period, about $2 billion in crop insurance payments across all the policies were paid out over that period of time. Now, one of the cool things to look at is the cause of loss. And this is the advantage of this tool because, and I'll go to it. And you have all different kinds of causes of loss, right? Excess drought, hail, heat, da-da-da. And I'm doing all, and I'm going to update that. And I'm going to go back to Arkansas, and I'm going to pull down now some graphs that are kind of cool to look at. if you just want to look at some more detail of Arkansas. And again, I could do this down to the county level. So I could even look at just at Washington County data. This gives you a sense of the payments that went out over time. You can see this is kind of interesting because if you look at about 2009 or so, you see this trend. What is the trend? The trend line is upward. And that's what climate scientists are predicting, that we're going to have high variability in losses and we're going to see increased losses. You can see that, however, that this is based on mostly these commodity crops. Although you can see fresh market tomatoes, which we'll see a little later. And this is just a distribution of when the payments were made. That's not so much. Again, causes of loss. But here's an interesting thing. So in Arkansas in general, the major cause of loss was too much moisture, followed by heat, drought, flood. And so you're only seeing cold weather and to be thinking about that in terms of Guy, Guy was talking about freezes as being important. Of course, that's for fruit, but what we know is that fruit wasn't very much insured under the crop insurance program, so it did not show up as a cause of loss in the data. But in terms of commodity crops, these are the major causes that we see. And so you can, like I say, can go down to the county, and this would be a good way for someone who wanted to look at the historic risks and the causes of loss that occurred in their county over a pretty long period of time. They can begin to get a sense of the kinds of risk that at least the past has told us. Now, what the future will be like is, of course, a different thing. I'm going to stop there, but that's just a cool tool to see about Arkansas. So I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to share and go back to where I left off, and hopefully that went transparently. Did everybody? Am I back? Tell me there. Somebody. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. Okay. So in Arkansas, fruits and nurseries in Arkansas, there's really basically three ways to insure a crop. One's the yield insurance. They call it APH, or actual production history, because it's based on your actual history. And this, again, these perils, droughts, fires, etc., that impact yield. Dollar for nursery is I had to put it in there, even though it's very not much usage of this, is used for fruit trees. So this could be an insurance policy that Guy could use, and it's based on the dollar value. It just protects an estimate of the dollar value of what Guy has in his nursery, and then gives at a cost, will ensure that dollar estimated value. And again, the loss is usually not a revenue loss, but a yield loss. So you have a value of inventory that is insurable at a price, and so to a certain, not 100%, but again, it's a dollar value. It's not very common part. And then there's whole farm revenue, which, as I said, protects up to 85% of the revenue of the whole farm, and it can insure almost any product. We're going to get into that in detail. So where is this? Is another, people always are calling me and they say, can I protect this crop in my county or in my state? And it's not an easy answer to give, because it depends. And now we're going to go again, and we're going to look at another tool. Okay. And I'm going to share screen again. And I got to find the right tool. And it's going to share it. You see that map of the United States again? Someone give me an okay, because I'm always worried about I'm sharing correctly.
Yep.
Oh, good. Now, this is from the USDA's Risk Management Agency, and it's called the Risk Map Viewer. And hopefully it's going to work fairly fast. Sometimes this can be overloaded. If it gets overloaded, we'll skip it. But it can tell you a lot about what commodities, what crop insurance. So I was saying peaches, right? So I'm going to the current year. I'm going to select a commodity, and I'm going to do just peaches, because I was just going to show you. So can I insure peaches in Arkansas? And oranges, potatoes, Oh, I'm sorry. What I didn't do, I always do this wrong. You have to switch to the commodity programs. I was doing something called supplemental insurance. So I'm starting over again. Sorry about that. I knew I was going to make that mistake. Now we can find peaches. So we go down here, you can see all the different things that are potentially insurable. And let's go to peaches. And you can see it populates the counties. And here's Arkansas peaches. So if you look down here, and I can go right to the state itself. Let's just do Arkansas. And you can see in these counties, you can buy yield insurance for peaches in Arkansas, but not in the other counties. There's something called a written agreement, which is a way, say I was in this county, Perry County, and I'm pretty close to that county, right? So I could go to RMA and I could go through my crop insurance agent. I could get a special written agreement that would kind of be based on that policy here. It just creates an extra hassle. But if you're in this county, for sure, you can buy a yield insurance policy for peaches. So this is a kind of a cool map to show you. But the thing is as you can see, this is the funny thing about specialty crops. So yes, there is a policy for yield for peaches, but it's not available everywhere. It's available mostly where peaches are grown, I grant you that. But in even other, even Georgia and other places, you can't get a peach policy easily or necessarily in the county in which you are. So it's hard for me to answer that question when people always ask me, because it depends. Anyway, you can play with this tool with all different kinds of crops to find out where they are. And the links to them will be readily available to you. I'm going to share again my screen, go back. And are we back?
Yes.
Yes, right.
Yes. we're back.
Okay. All right. I know I keep asking, but I can't see, so I
that's
don't know
cool.
for sure. So the cool thing about whole farm revenue, my favorite policy, is it's available everywhere in the United States. Every single county in the United States, and you can't see Hawaii and Alaska, they're available there too, and Puerto Rico for that matter. But anyway, it is the only crop insurance policy that is available for basically all crops and livestock products in the entire United States and every county in the United States. That's something. That's the only policy that can do that. So even me, when I'm right up here in Silverboe County, Montana, and I can grow tomatoes here and I can insure them under a whole farm revenue policy. Now, it's risky to grow tomatoes in Montana, believe me, especially in Butte, but that's another story. But I can insure it through the whole farm revenue program. And here's the history. It goes back actually before there used to be a program called AGR and AGR Lite before whole farm revenue was created in 2014. But you can see it had in 2014 Farm Bill, by 2015 this is when the whole farm revenue really started. These were called Just to Grow Revenue, which was essentially the same program, and it's now become declining. And there's reasons for that. Many of them policy related. But I want you also to pay attention that look at the difference. Now, the average diversity of farm was actually highest in 2017, is declining a bit. But you can also see that the range, sometimes, across all the whole farm revenue, across the entire United States, we're insuring a lot of specialty crops, a lot of crops that are not insured in any other way. So the basics. The first point I want to make here, it ensures an estimate. And it is an estimate of the expected economic capacity of the farm to produce revenue. And that's not revenue, that's gross revenue, up to a maximum of, and it should have, actually that's $10 to $17 million in the other one, up to a maximum. So to be eligible, the farmer needs to be operating at least 3 years if they're a veteran farmer or a beginning farmer, and 5 years otherwise. So it's not one of its first constraints. It's not immediately available for a person starting out in the first year, because you have to develop a history upon which the insurance can be based. And we don't know the economic capacity of your farm until you have some records to show that you do. So that's a critical piece and a limitation. But just think of it very differently, because it's not about the yield. It basically is saying to you under this policy, grow the things that will maximize your revenue. We will make an estimate of your capacity to generate that gross revenue, and then we'll insure some proportion of it, up to 85% of it. That's the basic concept, and it's extremely different from almost all other crop insurance policies, which makes it confusing for all the people in the industry and farmers and ranchers in general. And it does, and it's not, it includes aquaculture, but aquaculture and livestock, you can only go up to $2 million gross value, but $17 million in gross value, and that's at the lowest rate. Those are significantly large farms. This is not a small farm program per se, although it can work with small farms. It can work for fairly large farms as well, and it has. Again, it's not just an indemnity payment won't be made. Now, this is an important point because it is based on the estimate is based on the records of your taxes, your Schedule F in most cases. The indemnity can't be made until your taxes are filed, which is usually quite a while after your cropping year. So you have, or livestock product year, your accounting year. And so therefore you have to have filed those before the claim can be adjusted, which means it delays payment for a considerable amount of time. And that is an issue, but there's really no way to know what you actually did produce and what was the loss relative to your history without doing so. And the more things you grow, proper livestock products, the lower the cost. And that's something cool too about it. And for organic growers, it automatically embeds organic values of your crops or livestock products to the extent that your revenue history is based on selling things at an organic price. So if your revenue is emblematic of having organic crops and being in an organic mag, those will be the basis of your revenue guarantee. Therefore, they're kind of embedded, and that's important because for other crop insurance policies, there's a bit of a confusion on what is the value of a specific organic crop, and that's a whole other story in itself. But it also only covers the raw value of the product. It does not, for instance, if you grow strawberries and you make it into jam and you sell the jam, your insurable value, the gross value that will be counted, is only the strawberry production, and you have to take out that extra value that came in, and that will be only based on the raw products value. Now, to the extent you have a value added operation, this can make an application a little bit more cumbersome, because obviously if you're taking a lot of products and making them into a value added product, then you have to work backwards to get to that raw product value of your farm, which has caused problems and can make it difficult for people to apply. One of the reasons that people who do that don't like the policy. Premium summit will improves with 3 or more products. So you can get a higher level of coverage if you grow at least 3 or more products. But the premium rate will lower as you add products, and it stops at 7. Why it stops at 7, I'm not really quite sure, because many people grow more than 7 things, but they basically, RMAs decided that after 7, there's no more incentive provided. But that's a cool incentive, because as you add more and more, the cost of your premium and good ounce, which makes sense if you think about it, because you're, again, like Guy said, you're diversifying your risk across a lot of different products. Therefore, your risk is lower overall, and therefore your premium should be lower. It tracks historic, and if history do not meet. This is another thing that is something we have been trying to change for the last 3 or 4 years from a public policy point of view. It is the only crop insurance policy in the United States that tracks your historic expenses as well as your historic revenue. And it penalizes if you do not, in the year of insurance, do not meet that the average historic expenses, at least 70% of your historic expenses, you can be dinged. And you can be, I call it the expense penalty. No other crop insurance requires such records. No other crop insurance has such a penalty involved in it. And we've been working very hard to get that removed from the policy, but it is there now. And that can be a burden in terms of your final payout if you don't make it. There's a new micro program, which I can't discuss because we do not have the details yet, that is going to make some of the paperwork and eliminate the expense reporting, but only for farms that have a, historically have 120,000 or less. So a very small segment of the population of farms. But again, the details it'd be interesting to see how that's going to come out. It's also interesting that whole farm has been recognized as one of the more climate friendly or smart policies in the pantheon of all the policies in the federal crop insurance program. Because why? It incentivizes cropping and livestock diversity, which we all know from a sustainable agriculture point of view, build a certain degree of resilience. And it actually incentivizes that. So to the degree you're diverse, the degree your crop insurance lowers, and actually lowers your actual risk as well. But they did say in a recent report that this is because it does this, it's great. But unfortunately, only 1,900 polys were sold in 2021. So the impact on the climate is probably limited at this point. Unless we get more of these policies sold. What does it cost? This is what everybody, and it depends. Like in all insurance, it depends. And it depends on part on the variability of your historical approved revenue. I'm going to do an example that'll become more apparent. But if you can imagine this, if you have a highly variable revenue, then your average revenue experience may be fairly low because you have a lot of ups and downs. If you have a kind of a calm history, that's not a lot of up and downs, then when you go to insure, your historic and your expected revenue in the year of insurance are closer. That'll become more clear later. Again, depends on how different your expected revenue insurance year. If you have an expansion, they can account for that. But if you suddenly are expecting a really high revenue, but your history only says a lower revenue, you'll be actually insured at the lower revenue, and that may not work. Again, it depends on how much products you produce. Again, the more up to 7 the premium is lower, so it costs less if you're growing more things up to a certain point. Depends on the relative expected value of what you produce. For instance, if you have 5 crops and the whole farm revenue is 100,000, but 2 crops do really, really well, greater than you expected, and a couple of them just flop entirely, but your average revenue overall is is the same as your history, you're still not going to see and that's a disadvantage if you have specific crops that of course you're expecting to do, but in a sense you're still protected. Even if one thing fails and the other thing's doing better, then you might not see a payment, but at least you're protected if all things fail. So it does have that thing. And this insurance can be bought with other individual policies. So if you have something specific that you want to, and it's available, you could insure that separately and use whole farm, and you can combine the two. It gets complicated, but your agent can work through that. Almost always less expensive than individual brought. If you had available 5 different policies for each individual crop, and they were available in your county, and you added those all up with the premiums for that, I guarantee you that putting under whole farm would probably be cheaper than buying those policies individually, because you're basically packaging the thing together. So that's another advantage of it. So let's look at an example. Now I know this is Washington County, Arkansas. This was kind of based on Guy's farm. I know this isn't what Guy is making, so this is in that sense it's a hypothetical scenario, but we're going to look at products that are the things like Guy uses. So this is the original history of the farm. You can see that, and what do you see first about this? This is a highly variable farm. It had some really good years, then a really bad year, then a really good year, a really bad year, but its average economic capacity to generate revenue is 130,000, just straight average, right? Well, through a work of policy over years, we got them to say, well, this is kind of, people with a variable history might not be able to insure because their average is going to look goofy when they have all this variability. So we did this thing called, and it gets confusing. You have to just figure out what you want to do in terms of what you want to buy. You have to run basically several scenarios. So one thing you can do is what they call the 60% replacement. So the 60% of this 130 is 78,000. And you can see I put 78,000 in the place of these lower numbers, and I came up with a slightly higher average. That's smoothing out the curve. And then the other option you have is to throw out the lowest year. So I just throw out 20,000 divided by the remaining years, and I get this. And then the last option is to take 90, if you had crop insurance, if you had whole farm revenue last year, and let's say it was 130,000, then you could actually insure it at 90% of last year's. That's another option. So you have all these 4 options to choose from, and you usually want to take the higher of the 2, because usually in the year you're going to insure, you're either going to expect that revenue, you want the revenue that you expect to have to be closer to the thing, and I'll show you that on the next slide. It'll become a little more clear. So here's organic pears, organic apples, organic grapes, and organic nursery trees, and these are all insurable under whole farm revenue. That's the cool thing, and they all can be insured organically. And so this is what this hypothetical farm expects to generate in revenue, and you notice it's actually a little less than its historic average when we smoothed it out. But we have 10 acres. These are fairly accurate numbers. I actually used the productivity, the yield in acres. Price units are what is called the county T levels in Arkansas for some of these crops. So these are fairly realistic. There's only one county that provides grapes, and I believe that's Washington County. And the only county that provides yield insurance is in Washington County. So, but this could be in any county in Arkansas because it's whole farm revenue. And you can see the nursery operation is generating more revenue than the rest, but they're fairly evenly across the different products. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 commodities here. So we picked the higher of those 3, 4 options, the 157 for the historic, and 153 is expected. Now here's the key point. The revenue guarantee is always based on the lower of those 2. So here's where you can see, if we had to take the straight average, then that would have been a lot lower. That would be like $130,000, and we would have to have insured only, the revenue guarantee would be $130, and the guy's expecting 153. So again, it's your decision, but basically they're saying, well, your history only says 130, and if we jiggle it around, it says 157, and whatever the problem is, when you work the numbers, it's always the lower of the 2. So if the spread between these 2, or the historic and expected, is wide, that can cause issues about whether you want to buy the insurance or not. So the revenue guarantee is that, but again, there's always a deductible. So 85% of that revenue guarantee is 130. That's called the trigger point. So when this farm goes through its year, it can have a loss of $23,000 in revenue before it sees a penny of insurance because of this deductible. It starts paying out once it's 130,000. And here's the bottom line, the cost. Now you can see there's a fairly high cost for that amount of revenue, but why is that fairly high? Think of the crops we're talking about. As Guy said, these are fairly risky crops in that particular county. So they figured it's kind of a risk, so the premium's going to be higher. But the beauty of crop insurance, or maybe the detriment, depending on how you want to talk about it, is that it's highly subsidized. So the farmer would pay $11,000 for that guarantee for this farm, and it would be subsidized by tax dollars at $14,000. Is that a good deal or not? I don't know, but go to your crop insurance agent, make them run the numbers, and find out if it works for you. And if it works for you, think about it. So the closing date to purchase for Arkansas is 2/28/22. That's coming up fairly soon. So if you want to explore this, get into your agents or find an agent and go and look. There are different years. People use different fiscal years, so there's variations depending on when you file your taxes. That varies across. That's why we have these different dates. But in Arkansas, regardless of when you file, except for what they call late fiscal filers, which actually then you have to buy it by 11/20/21 because that's it's just a weird way the fiscal year goes, and since it's based on taxes. But basically, this is the 228 if you're going to buy it in Arkansas. And this gives you a really cool tool. I could go to it, but maybe we'll save time. It takes you to a really cool tool that you can locate different agents in the state of, in your county, the nearest one to you. It's a very nice tool for finding it. But I would recommend that to shop around the best you can for a good crop insurance agent. Make sure your agent is helping you and looking out for your best interest, and make them explore all the options, not just sell you on something or steer you away from something. If you really want them to run the numbers on whole farm revenue, they should do that for you. Some conclusions to conjectures. So explore alternatives for the crops that you grow. As we see, there's limitations on what you can do for specialty crops in Arkansas. Whole farm revenue gets around that. Again, there's that written agreement option. If you're near a county that has peaches, you might be able to go through a process to get a peach contract. But again, we were only talking like 3 specialty crops that have been used regularly in the state of Arkansas. And how variable is your gross revenue? I said that's important, because the variability can mean your insurance revenue may not be enough to cover for what you expect. I really firmly believe that it's one of the most, and this is probably its biggest, very burdensome to apply, but particularly if you have a lot of different products. Can you imagine you have to account for all the different products you grow, their yields, their historical. That's not so bad, because that's based on your insurance. I mean, I'm on your records, but then your expected use, you have to make a determination of your expected revenue, and all of that has to be worked out in detail. And the more crops you have to do that for, the more complicated. But all the APs must legally provide this for you. But again, if you find an agent who doesn't really want to talk about whole farm revenue, then try to find one who does, because you don't want to work with an agent who really doesn't want to work with a product. Again, if you have 7 or less products, there's a premium discount. Again, if it's more, that can be burdensome than if you have 30. Contracted prices help sometimes. If you contract a lot of what you sell, that can give you some better information that makes the process of applying easier. And here's the RMA website, which has a lot of tools. You really should play around with that. You can learn a lot from it. It's a fairly good thing. And I will conclude and take some questions. And here's some links that will be put in there. We have some great information, and that's my contact. And anybody there? I hope I haven't lost everybody.
We had 22 people
Nope,
on here.
we're here.
Okay.
All
So
right,
we
that
got
was
some
good, Jeff.
questions.
You can stop sharing your screen, Jeff.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm sorry. That would make it better. Yeah, there we are. There's regular people instead of just looking at a screen. All right.
Yeah, we also have a survey. We like for you. I mean, for you all
At the
to
end.
complete the survey. If you all mind doing that while we answer questions. This is what we have to report. Aisha, you mind pulling that survey up so we could answer the surveys?
Yeah, I think, don't they just send them to you automatically usually afterwards? I think.
Well, we kind of post them so they could
Okay, I got
they
it.
can answer it on the spot right there.
All right, cool. Any questions?
I don't have a question, Jeff, but I really wanted to thank you, because I've known bits and pieces of this before, but you really filled in some blanks for me, and I think I have an actual understanding of it now.
Yeah, I think to respond to that, the important point is why this has been complicated for people. One is depending on how diversified you are. The more diversified in things you have to track, the more hard it is to actually apply, because you have to account for all those things. And if you don't have good record keeping and all of that, it's a lot of paperwork. But if you're down to 7 or less things, and those are very valuable to you, it may become valuable to you to do it. And I think the other thing is that the concept is so different from typical insurance. The idea that you're not talking about what you grow so much as the capacity of the farm to generate revenue and the insurability of that based on your history. That gives you a sense of how risky. I mean, if your farm's revenue history is really variable, that tells you a lot about the riskiness of what you're growing, the combination. If your historic revenue is fairly smooth, that tells you that you probably have the right combination of things, that you maybe have you have improved risk because of the way you grow things, because your income is staying fairly variable, and that may change over time as you change the things you do or weather changes. So it's something you have to kind of track and think of in that way before you even get to the point of wanting to think about insuring it. And then again, finally, the more valuable the things you have. I mean, many of the specialty crops are highly valuable crops, but there's no other way than whole farm revenue to insure them. Look in Arkansas, there's only three specialty crops that were insured last year. And I know there's more than that. I know there's more than that on your farm alone, right? So obviously there's great potential to insure a lot of crops that are not being insured with this product, if we could make it a little easier for people to go through the process. And the agents need to be trained, and the actuaries and the adjusters need to be trained on this a little bit better than they have over the years. But it's been around for a while, and the people that use it and use it well really like it. And there's agents that have sold it and really like selling it, and they can build their business, their insurance business on it too, because they can cater to a whole new sector of agriculture that is basically uninsured. I sound like an insurance salesman sometimes. I don't mean to.
That could be a really helpful tool for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions? Oh, what do we got there? What does that mean? Okay. We got some really people that know not about insurance. That's cool. Any questions? I see some in the chat, something in the chat there, but maybe that's just other. Rock, do you see any other questions?
No, I don't see any other questions.
Oh, very good information. Thank you much for attending. Don't be afraid to ask. I love to answer questions.
Yeah, ask Justin. If it was something that he left out, if it's something that he needs to bring.
Maybe I'll ask the audience, has anyone ever tried to buy insurance? And has anybody ever tried to buy whole farm revenue insurance? I mean, there were only, 13 policies sold last year in Arkansas. It would be nice if one of them showed up for it, but they didn't. and I could actually find out later if anybody's interested. I could probably. No, I can't really. I used to have data on some of the earlier years. We did some research on this over a 5-year period, and I do have data down to the individual policy levels. I could tell you a lot about historically what kinds of crops whole farm revenue was insuring in the state of Arkansas. I probably should have done that for this, but our data, we only got data up to 2018 available, so it's a bit dated. But I had data from about 2015 to 2018, and it was a very, very laborious research project. But I had up down to the individual level, I had data on whole farm revenues in many of the states, so I could actually tell you what specific crops and what value were actually included under whole farm revenue and the average diversity of the farms in Arkansas. So I can get that data for people if anybody's interested in the past. But it's surprising. That's something I should mention. This is not only, like I said, for small scale. There's a 13,000 acre grain farm, organic grain farm, that grows about 28 different kinds of crops, oil seeds, and pulses, that is using whole farm revenue because there's no other insurance for spelt. I don't know if you know what spelt is, but it's a kind of grain, and it's not insurable except through whole farm revenue. And yet somebody's, particularly organic spelt, is making a very good living and has a lot of value in that crop, and now can insure it through whole farm revenue. So it's not just for the smallest farm. It's really for the farm who's growing unusual things that can't get insurance any other way, that has something that's very valuable, that if they lose it, it does cause them a lot of economic pain. So if you're in that kind of farm that is not too complicated in diversity, but has crops that are insurable no other way, and where you're depending on the value of 2 or 3 crops that are uninsurable in any way, that is the niche. That's the sweet spot, I think, for people to really seriously look into this product, even with the burdensome paperwork that you might have to go through.
I have a few quick questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If someone is trying to, say, grow tomatoes in Alaska, are they going to have a higher premium than if they are trying to raise tomatoes in California?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, how could it be otherwise? So yes,
Right.
you can buy a whole farm revenue product to insure tomatoes in Alaska, but it's going to cost you more, because the actuarial science, the basis, the premiums, does look at the collection of crops. That's why for this example I ran through was a fairly high premium when you went to the actual premium cost. Now the subsidization brought the cost down a lot, but $25,000 on $153,000 of value is a pretty high premium. But those crops, as Gaia will attest to, are very risky crops to grow in Washington County, Arkansas. And so the premium has to be adjusted. So yes, whole farm revenue for tomatoes is available as part of a complement of a farm in Alaska, but yes. And it also goes true for if you're growing something that's not been recognized by your county as something never grown before. Pawpaws. I wanted to look and I should have looked, but I don't believe pawpaw is listed on the list of commodities that the RMA recognizes as an insurable crop. But even that can be insured because they have a category called other crop or other fruit. Immediately when you use that category in a whole farm revenue policy, your premium will shoot up. Why? Because that is a product they have no history on knowing. They have no idea what the risk of growing pawpaws is. They have no idea what the value of it is. So if that's part of what you grow, your insurance will be higher. But at the same token, on the other side of it, pawpaws can be very valuable because they're highly specialized. So, you should pay more for the premium to cover it because you're covering a higher value of something. It's like insuring a junky old Ford, Model T and a brand new Cadillac, right? It's going to cost you more to insure the Cadillac because it's highly valued thing, and the risk, whatever. Although maybe driving a Model T is dangerous, who knows? But actuarial science figures that stuff out, and they adjust premiums to compensate for that. Good question, though.
Yeah.
And is there a minimum for whole farm revenue?
No,
You
no
mentioned so,
minimum. There's a maximum, but there's no minimum. But I mean, you might not want to go through the effort if you have $1,000 worth of goods and you got to pay a $25 premium for protecting $1,000. It might, that's a legal definition of a farm. It's $1,000 of product, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I wouldn't necessarily not recommend it, but you could do it. You have to be a legally defined farm, that's for sure, but that's pretty low bar in terms of the minimum.
So Jeff, I have a question. What if,
Yeah.
I know you said if you have a specialty crop like that pawpaws, and the insurance policy would go up. Let's say you have, it's not cash flowing enough. You're not making enough off the pawpaws to actually pay for that particular policy. How would a farmer justify getting that particular insurance? Should he buy it or should he not get that particular?
Well, I mean, the way to think of that is that, first of all, this is based on your gross revenue, not your net revenue. Okay. So and what percentage of your total farm's revenue is dependent on that pawpaw income? And how valuable is it relative to the other things you grow? That's what you would look at, and you'd say, and how risky. I've grown pawpaw. You'd have to be growing it for 5 or 3 years, depending on, if you're a beginning farmer or veteran farmer or whatever. So you have that history. So you have some knowledge of how risky pawpaws are, and then you have to just run the numbers and say, is it worth it? I mean, how likely are you going to lose all your pawpaw value in any given year? You know that better than I do, and you can look at some of that data with that ag-risk viewer and see historically where the dangers are. But usually farmers have a good sense of where the dangers are, and And as they get more knowledge, I mean, in some ways, the fact that you can't buy it till you have 5 years of history is kind of a good thing, because at that point, you know the relative risk of what you're growing, and you know whether it's worth buying the policy at all. And again, I started this out. Insurance is only one way to mitigate risk. You may just diversify more, and you find that the diversity in itself. We found in our research that there was a policy in the research I did that had something like 67 crops insured under whole farm revenue. I can't imagine the application process for that, and to track 65 separate crops. And they bought a policy, and they didn't get any premium discount after 7, and they still bought the policy. But with that level of diversity, I'm not sure it would have been worth it, because think of it, if 2 or 3 things do really well, and in the 2 or 3 things do poor, your revenue, your overall whole farm's revenue stays relatively the same. So you're not going to see a payment because your diversity has compensated for that. That's why they can reduce the premium as you add crops, because you're essentially not putting all your baskets in one basket, all your eggs in one basket. And so there's a natural incentive to lower premiums as you add costs, because you're the whole farm. Again, you have to be thinking revenue. Don't think about the specific crops per se so much as the relative value of the things you grow. And if you have one that's particularly really important for your farm, but the other ones aren't, then it could be problematic as to whether the whole farm revenue. Ideally, let's say that was fresh market tomatoes, which they have some policies in Arkansas for fresh market tomatoes in certain counties. And if I was growing fresh market tomatoes and I had a bunch of other crops, I would probably just buy the fresh market one, because that would be specific to that crop and affect that crop, which is really important to my farm's revenue. And therefore, that's what I'd put my insurance dollars on, rather than buying whole farm. But if the revenue is distributed amongst many crops fairly evenly, then whole farm becomes more in play. But until you get to a lot, if you got a lot of them, then your diversity itself is your insurance, and you might not need it. But again, it's a sweet spot where you're kind of in that 1 to 7, maybe 10 crops and products. Remember, this covers eggs and cows, and as we'll see in the further coming one, I'm going to do one on livestock, and then one on a diversified vegetable farm. That, depending on what you're growing, this can work or not work. And there are some alternatives, which I'll explore in future things in terms of livestock. The livestock one that I think up next, or the throwing one, is kind of an interesting case, because there are some other options that might be more viable. And again, if you're only doing 2 or 3 livestock products, livestock has a whole inventory problem, for instance, because you can only insure the value of your inventory from the beginning in. So you have to do this in inventory adjustment, which is also another painful part of the adjustment with. We'll get into that next time. But so it really depends. But it's no like simple answer to say this will work for you, because you have to really run the numbers to be able to say if it works for you. And so when people call me and say, well, whole farm revenue, I have to say, well, tell me your revenue history. Tell me what you're growing. Tell me where you're located. Tell me, what have been your previous risks? What do you think are the major risks you have? Can you compensate them for them in other ways? Again, insurance is one option. It's not the only one.
All right. We have any more questions, comments, suggestions? Anybody want to?
Good job.
Great. Yeah.
That's a tough subject, and that was a good job. I really understand a lot more.
Well, like I said, after about 102 times doing it, I'm getting really, really good at it.
Told
Do
you
it
he
in my
was
sleep.
He was our guru. He was our guru.
But it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to do, because as I traveled around the country, and I have literally from Hawaii to other places, give talks on this, there's a uniqueness in American agriculture that's very, that I really have fun, because with whole farm revenue, you find the most incredibly unique farms that people are trying to make a living. And what the beauty of it, again, is this covers them all and is every place. So you you can explore some very interesting situations and very experienced situations that I think are which gives me hope for this polar vortex that hurt Texas this year. And I'm just was thinking of all the specialty crops that are uninsured. And there was one whole farm revenue policy sold in Texas that year. And if there had been 1,000 of them, at least they would have had some compensation for loss.
Yeah.
Now there was disaster payments, there were all of those things, but they could have been so many farms that would have protected from that. And like you were saying, some of those are permanent damage to years of work, particularly like orchards and things like that. The losses in grapefruits in Texas was enormous because of that polar vortex, and millions of dollars worth of losses. I mean, I look at these things and it gives me shivers sometimes because I know where the data is and I can see how bad things were for people. I can also see how good things were for people, but it's and I think we're not moving. The one thing I can show for sure is crop insurance is going to cost more in the future, even though it's subsidized, because we're going to have more erratic. You saw those curves; they're erratic and they're moving up.
Yep.
And I think that's a general trend across the country. And so crop insurance is going to play a role there, but building resilient systems is also going to play a role there. And so we need to build resilience and not just depend on insurance. But it's going to have to be some combination of the two, I think, for a very raucous future. And hopefully some places it'll be better. We're a little warmer here in Montana. I never mind a little warmer in Montana. Thanks.